Hi everybody, welcome. This week is Unit 10, Nationalism, and our reading is going to be Chapter 20 in our textbook, The West. Nationalism is by far the most powerful political force that has emerged in the last 200 years. And it has spread around the world, and it, in fact, has become such a part of our daily lives, it's very difficult for us to realize, in fact, how relatively recent it is. Now, nationalism is an ideology that draws on some of the most revered and ancient human passions: loyalty, love, friendship, duty, honor, but applies them in a quite revolutionary way, not just to our local family group or clan or tribe, but to large so-called nations of millions of people, the vast majority of whom, of course, we will never know or have any contact with, except, in fact, they are part of this large and somewhat mythical family. Now, nationalism was a response in many ways to industrialism, but it was also a response to the Enlightenment and the French and American revolutions, because a new organizing political principle was needed. And ultimately, nationalism is a secular religion, because now remember, the events that took place up to, say, the French Revolution, by a series of steps, particularly in the West, tended to decrease the authority and legitimacy of organized religion in different countries to varying extents in one place or another. And in the French Revolution in particular, it symbolized this by essentially becoming a direct attack on the power of the Catholic Church, and then subsequently during the Revolution praising the reason, in fact, and making an altar to reason, which was substituting for religious practices that occurred beforehand. And so the idea of nationalism, the idea of a universal, or not universal, but a widespread loyalty among people of a common nation, really only begins to develop in the late 18th century and then in the 19th century. Now, Ernest Renan, the famous French political philosopher, gave what's the most famous definition of what is a nation, and you'll be reading that this week. He asked in an article, what is a nation? And he largely said it is people who have had a joint experiences together in the past and shared some histories in the past, and will have similar experiences in the future. And it's such a vague and imprecise definition because, in fact, there is no adequate definition for what a nation is. It's a slippery term if there ever was one. And it may be the kind of thing that we know a nation when we see it, but there really is no agreed-upon term by historians or political scientists of what constitutes a nation. This week we'll be looking at George Orwell's Notes on Nationalism, and in his essay you'll see he's not using the word nationalism. He's using it in a kind of unusual way. But in fact, I think he comes closer to some of the elements of nationalism in a more accurate way than some of the traditional writers on nationalism, because he just says nationalism is the habit, essentially, of grouping people like they were insects, and that, in fact, diminishing their individuality. So George Orwell, the great champion of individual liberty, in fact, his most of his writings are a defense of the fact that the individual has the right to be a self-standing creature. And as we'll see in 1984, of course, that's one of the themes of 1984, and that's Winston Smith's battle with Big Brother, is trying to be an individual. And it's for that reason that the original title of 1984 was called The Last Man in Europe. Now, the fundamental point to take away is that it's the nationalism is largely a romantic concept because it really flowers in the romantic period after the Enlightenment. Because and romantic in this sense is you might think of it as passion. It's a passionate and largely invented loyalty belief that replaces earlier passions for organized around religious practices. So it really is, nationalism really is a secular religion. It has the same power and much of the cohesive strength of religious faith. But the interesting thing is, especially looking at a nation like the United States, a country like the United States, which is both strongly nationalistic and strongly liberal at the same time, because fundamentally, nationalism is in many ways a opposite of liberalism, and so that's which we looked at last week in Unit 9. So the challenge this week is to think about how nationalism evolved around the world and how it spread around the world and how it changed our lives and is still doing so to this day. Good luck.